What's up, everyone? I'm Adam Hoffman with Recovery and Release, talking about mobility practice. I'm here with Joe Battle from Tampa Bay Krav Maga. We're going to break down his movement, look at his movement, my movement, and identify some restrictions on his body and his movement, and see if we can loosen them up so that we can ultimately improve, well, his performance for his practice, and so that translates into everyday life, really, so that we're not walking around restricted. So to do that, we're going to work on the squat, right? The deep sit of a squat, which looks like this, but isn't as simple as this. So in order to move properly, you have to at least start with proper posture. In other words, if you're not in proper position, you can't move through proper position. So I'd like to align Joe's posture properly, more or less. And to do that, I'll ask you to set your heels so they're about shoulder width apart here, Joe. Toes facing more or less forward. So ideally, your feet are more or less parallel, maybe a little tuck in of your toes. Otherwise, feet should be straight. Now, pretty cool thing, we have arches in our foot, right? Everybody knows we have arches in our foot. If you have flat feet, your knees probably tuck in and you probably have a little bit of a rotation in your hips, but we want to pronounce those arches because they're like built-in suspension in our bodies for our knees, our ankles, and our hips. To do that, you can externally rotate your hips. So Joe will ask you to externally rotate your hips, and as he does that, in other words, try to press your heels together. Good. Keep your toes down. All right. And straighten your knees, point your knees out. You see how there you go, good. What you've done is basically pronounce the arches of your feet. So in other words, once you internally rotate your knees, your legs, you see my arches collapse, my knees collapse, but when you externally rotate them, you set up for proper posture, right? Now I'll ask you to go a little bit wider with your heels. And from this position, squeeze your glutes. Good, because if your pelvis isn't neutral, if it's rounded forward, well, then you can't move your knee properly. But if you realign your pelvis, then your knee goes all the way up, right? And that translates into a deep squat if your pelvis isn't in proper position to start. So, Joe, I'll ask you to squeeze your glutes, press your heels in together, and then lower your body down to the ground. And as you're doing that, push your knees out, push your knee against my hand, and then lower yourself down into that position. Now, if that's a little uncomfortable, go ahead, walk your heels in a little bit closer, but try to keep your toes forward, right?
Yeah, I really feel it in that position. Going from there, instead of trying to squeeze my arches in, having this position, really pressing it to when I externally rotate my knees, I really feel that pull, and I really feel that building my arch. And then the back side here, my posterior side, I really now feel my glutes and everything else engaged. And going into that squat, now I can really feel my body aligning perfectly in that position.
These are incredibly important points, right? A lot of times when people are squatting, they don't reposition that upper leg, and they don't turn on their glutes, and they don't get their quads to fire properly. And part of that is because there is no external rotation. But when you bring the external rotation in, you improve your ability to be more mobile, right? But also strong. If your glutes are firing and your quads are firing, then you can crush your squat. That can turn into improved performance, again, in Krav Maga. But also, when you twist your knee out, when you twist your upper leg out, you stabilize this knee joint. If it's not twisted in, if it's not twisted out, then it's in, and it's really loosey-goosey here. But when you externally rotate it there, you can kind of beat the outside of your knee. When it's internally rotated, it's kind of scary to even think about putting pressure on it. But it's stable here. You stabilize the knee, you realign the ankle, you pronounce your built-in suspension. It's like a 5 fur or a 6 fur, it's not the 2 fur type deal. But it also allows you to get your knees and your femur out of your hip, right? So depending on your anatomy, if you're coming forward here, your leg can get stuck in your hip. Well, if you set yourself up so that your knees get out of the way, your hips drop in between your legs, which allow you to sit deeper into it.
Yeah, that made a lot more sense.
Cool.
So just externally rotating that, now I feel everything else engaging when I drop into it.
Nice.
And here, I actually even, when we talked earlier about the outside of my leg firing, I don't feel it as much in this, and now I feel less pressure in my lower back.
Now I'll ask you to
Just by
take your elbows inside. Now try and push them out. Nice. So
Yeah,
that's your hips, right?
way less pressure.
We're looking at mobility of your hips there. And so, Joe, you just improved your mobility in having repositioned yourself, right? So mobility isn't just foam rolling, massaging, and stretching. It's knowing how to position your body.
That's why you're here.
That's why I'm here. So, but now we know that you have tightness on the outside of your calves. So let's dive deep into how we would address that.
Okay.
All right.